Well, good afternoon, everybody. I see have 18 of us here at the start time. So we're still missing, I think, 9, because we've grown to, I think, 27 in the class. So it's going to be important to be here on time just to avoid the musical chairs problem. So who of you have not had a chance to see this yet? For everybody else, it's time to get on. One of the reasons for the introduction is it shows me that you can get into the system, okay? The second is I want to just make sure that everybody has a means of access. It works from your iPhone, it works from your Android, it works from your laptop. You can get into the Blackboard with just about anything that you can get into the student portal with. So everybody's sure we're in the class. It's the 153/AR699C summer intro class. So I mentioned last Tuesday about the issue of professionalism and how I want to push that at the beginning of this class. There's a little thing from the career planning company that talks a little bit, what are some of the elements of professionalism and how do we make sure that we start applying them to our business from now on. So first, make being on time a priority. We mentioned this on Tuesday because if there are 27 people in the classroom and if I show up late, I've wasted time for every one of those 27 people because they're not going to listen to me talk for all that time. So, but same thing when you get into a project meeting or a job site or whatever, you end up with 10 highly paid executives or project leaders. That's a lot of money sitting around a table. And if we waste 10 or 15 minutes, we really lose a lot of time and money. So make being on time a priority. Don't be a grump. Whatever the traffic was like or whatever things are happening at home, bring your professional face to work because that's what it needs to be. Dress appropriately. When we go to the job sites, we got to have the right protection gear, the right shoes, the right pants. So dressing appropriately is important, business-wise, and you know, for you young ladies, it's interesting sometimes when we get to the presentation time. Some of the girls come dressed like they're going clubbing, and I have to tell you that when you're making your presentations, you're presenting your ideas, not yourself, and so it's important to make sure that the appropriate dress is there. Foul language, things like that, always break down the professionalism. So keep an eye on what you say and how you say it. Offer to help your colleagues. Sometimes you see somebody who's really struggling with something. Sometimes all they need is a conversation that helps them break through whatever that roadblock is. So feel free to reach out to your fellow students and to your other colleagues and see if there's a way you can offer to help them. Don't gossip. One of the things I fight the most around here is I listen to what I define it as the ill-informed misinforming the uninformed. So people who don't know what's going on are busy telling people who don't know anything what they think is going on, and they're missing the whole point. So gossip is a time waster. Gossip is also a relationship killer. So watch out for that. Try to stay positive. I mean, there's enough negative stuff we have to deal with in the job site. Things get late, things get behind time. We got to be positive because whatever's happened, we can't fix. What we need to do is go from that point to the next position. Don't hide from your mistakes. You make a mistake, admit it, have a solution, meet with your people you're reporting to, and resolve it. Always fight fair. We always will get into challenges where people want to argue, but understand that arguing is appropriate, but it should be on a professional level. Make your point, let the other person make their point. If you can't come to agreement, then that's a good time to separate and go away. And don't lie. There's nothing that happens worse than I remember having a field engineer who ended up going someplace in the middle of the afternoon for a kid's appointment and came back, and he had missed 2 truckloads of materials that came in, and we didn't have job tickets for it. And well, I got them all. It was almost 3 weeks before he finally said that he had left the job site. Okay, we probably spent 100 man-hours trying to track down the information on those couple truckloads of material because he just didn't tell the truth. You know, if he had told us, we could have gone back to the shipper and gotten a copy of their copy, and it would have been that easy as opposing to go through lots of files. So I put the whole text of this on Blackboard in the syllabus link so you can get at it and read some of the stuff that they talk about in those things. But I think these are really good points to keep out there for when you are thinking about your own professionalism. Oh, the last one, do your laundry at home. If things are bad at your company, if you're worried, don't talk about them at the job site. Keep that separate from your relationships with, your professional relationships with. Now, how many of you know who Quentin Tarantino is? And how many of you have seen the movie Pulp Fiction? Pulp Fiction is an interesting movie, but it has one really interesting scene that I like because it has a very unique point that Tarantino put in there.
Smile, you're on Mia's camera.
Ready to go?
No, not yet. Do you ever see Barbara Walters interview the movie stars?
Once or twice.
Well, that's what this is. Pretend I'm Barbara Walters, and I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions.
About what?
Oh, life, the world, yourself, whatever I might find interesting.
I don't like answering questions.
I've come up with it more or less. Tell me what kind of person I'm having dinner with. My theory is that when it comes to important subjects, there's only two ways a person can answer. Which way they choose tells you who that person is. For instance, there's only two kinds of people in the world. Beatles people and Elvis people. Now, Beatles people can like Elvis, and Elvis people can like Beatles, but nobody likes them both equally. Somewhere, you have to make a choice, and that choice tells you who you are. Well, now, I'm obviously not going to ask you that one, because you're definitely an Elvis man, but you hip to where I'm coming from. Can you dig it?
I can dig it.
I knew that you could. Okay, first question. Brady Bunch or the Partridge Family?
Partridge Family.
On Rich Man, Poor Man, who did you like more, Peter Strauss or Nick Nolte?
Nick Nolte, of course.
What's your favorite way to say thanks in a foreign language?
Merci beaucoup.
In conversation, do you listen or wait to talk?
I have to admit that I wait to talk, but I'm trying harder to listen.
If you... Print. Let's go eat.
That last point is the question that I like in there. When you're sitting with a group of people and there's a conversation going on, do you listen to what other people are saying, or do you think about what you're going to say as soon as you get your chance? Our industry really requires people to listen. You have to know what's going on. You may have something really important to say, but you need to listen throughout the entire conversation. So we're going to try that a lot in this class is when do we listen or when do we wait to talk? We could use this phrase, we're going to build a team. Well, we could change that word from team to house, a car, anything that can be built and will take more than just a couple minutes, and most sensible people will want to adopt a structured approach. One of our students who just graduated in CM spent 2 weeks ago doing a 1-week project for Habitat for Humanity. I think I mentioned it, where they built 4 houses in 4 2-story houses in 5 days. You know, they could not do that without a team. They really needed to put teams together and plan with that team so that when they got to the job site, it was just execute. It takes time to build a team. It takes time to build the skills that it takes to build a team. So one of the things that, for those of you who've been here for a year or two, you know you end up getting assigned to teams a lot. So the key becomes, how do we work in those teams to make sure that we produce what we need to do without burning each other out? So Today's class objectives are, we're going to talk a little bit about the construction industry. We're going to talk about what construction management really is. And then we're going to talk about the beginnings of how we get work. Most of these things should be somewhat familiar if you've read the 3 chapters. Did I mention the books, the textbooks? Was everybody able to get a copy of the textbook? Good. Everybody able to read the 3 copies? The chapters? Good. So, we want to be able to describe the significance of the construction industry as it relates to both the U.S. economy and the global economy, because it's really quite interesting. And we want to be able to define who the players are that are involved. We need to look at the basic definition of what construction management is, while appreciating the complexity of who construction managers are. Who can give me a quick answer as to what a construction manager is? Okay, if I went to try and explain what a construction manager was in India, which I have, by the way, they kind of look at me very strangely. Because when I went to school, remember back in the slide rule days, there was no such thing as a construction manager. The architect was responsible for protecting the owner's interest from the conception of the project to the occupancy of the project. And that is the way it is pretty much throughout the rest of the world, particularly those former British colonies, be sure to sign in, British colonies and people who work under the British law, because the architects still have that responsibility. So it's really where U.S. companies are in place now, and where international companies that have U.S. projects are in place, that the construction manager is setting into role. When I was a young architect, I used to go to the job site every morning on my way to the office, and I was building a 52-story high-rise building. So I would go there and I would literally count the reinforcing bars on the deck before they poured the concrete, because I wanted to make sure that I was inspecting it, that when they poured the concrete, everything was right. I came to the office one day and my boss says, "Come on in." So I sat down with him, and there was another guy in the office, turned out to be our insurance man. And he says, "You know, based on these new laws, you can't go to the job site and do inspections anymore." And I said, "Well, why not?" He says, "Because that's the trade's responsibility to do it right." And then, you can't, so you can go to the job site, but you must do what are called just casual observations. If somebody else has counted the bars, you can talk to them and make sure that they're happy with it, but you can't take on that responsibility yourself. And then when you get shop drawings, when they come in, you can no longer use that approved stamp that you have. You can say reviewed for compliance. And so what had happened was, in the late 70s, they changed laws in the United States where prior to that time, if Jordan and I were in business together, if I was the architect on a project and he was the general contractor on a project, I couldn't sue him and he couldn't sue me, because I had a contract with the owner and he had a contract with the owner. And since we did not have a contractual relationship, we could not sue each other. They changed the law so that you could now start to sue people who you never had a contractual relationship with. And what it called, I think it was the act, they called it the Lawyers Full Employment Act. I mean, they could just, so all of a sudden, as an architect, I was liable to people who were walking by the site and tripped, who I've never met. I was liable to people who were misinterpreting what I had shown on my drawings and were doing stuff. Sometimes, because we'll get into the different project delivery systems, the way we do them, the PDSs that are out there. And there's one called Construction Manager as Agent, and another one called Construction Manager at Risk. The Construction Manager as Agent is truthfully the owner's agent in the meeting. The Construction Manager at Risk may be working on managing contracts between the owner and prime contractors, but still has risks relative to the finance, okay? So those are some of the things we'll get into. But today, what happened is the people like me and a bunch of other people who were interested in that construction area of the phase started to become what really we called construction managers. We'd be hired by the owner. We'd manage the relationship with the architect and the owner. We'd manage the relationship with the contractor and the owner. And we did it on behalf of to protect the owner's interest. So that's how I define the construction manager today. It is an entity or person who protects the owner's interest from the beginning to the end of the project. Let's talk a little bit about this industry. This industry builds communities that serve people. Who knows how many people there are in the world today? 7.4 billion. Okay? Actually, in 2060, so 35 years from now, if we were all gathered together, there would be one person sitting in between each of you. That's just California. We're expected to go to 45 million people in California in the next 35 years. That's 45. So that's going to be about another 15 million people who need to drink water, unless we can figure out how to make the new generations not need water. So, but globally, we're going to be at about 9.6 billion people in that same 35-year plan. So we're going to be going about 2.2 billion people over the next 65 years. People need housing. People need warehousing. People need education. People need stores. People need food. All of these things are what drives our industry. Probably the most important element is population growth. So it's vast. It touches the lives of everybody and it contributes to the quality of life for all human beings. Historically, it's a very old profession. We've been building forever. I think since we stood up straight. We've evolved from a craft to an industry. Who knows the difference between a craft and an industry? And a craft is where somebody really works with the material. Okay? They turn products out of materials. So if you go back to the Renaissance and you look at the Gothic cathedrals and the beautiful stonework, those were built by people who were stonemasons who that was their craft. They might, when a building takes 400 years to build, you're going to go through a lot of craftsmen, okay? Because that whole concept has to come together. So, but it's become, as we've gone from the timing that it takes for craftsmen to put pieces together to the need to meet housing, education, religious, and other buildings for the population as it grows, we've had to become an industry that's focused more on the productivity of how we get things done. It has a significant impact on the global economy. So worldwide, we spend more than $3.9 trillion on construction every year. It employs more than 7 million people directly, and it provides the business for the steel industry, the lumber industry, carpet industry, paving industry, asphalt industry, you name it. All of those industries feed into our business. So, yes?
Do we consider the concrete industry?
Absolutely.
Steel or separate?
Concrete is separate from the steel because the steel industry deals with not just reinforcing, it deals with structural steel, it deals with sheet steel, it deals with all those different levels. The concrete industry is an amazing industry. When Chris Gennick was here as our provost for a year, he did an amazing presentation on what we are doing with concrete and the amount of concrete that's used around the world on a regular basis. But this is from our Bureau of Labor Statistics. This looks at our current employment numbers through June of 2015 that shows how many people are employed in each of these different areas. So if you look at residential building, construction of buildings, we have about 1.4 million people in the United States working in the construction of buildings. If you look at specialty trade contractors, we have another 4 million people working in that. If you look, when you get to the total for construction of buildings, you're looking at, we are 6.3 million people working in the trades or in the contracting for buildings, and then all of the people who work in the supply side of things. Now, interestingly enough, that's 6 million people out of 118 million people who work in the United States. So it's about 5% of the population is in the trades that build stuff. So you can see how we've gone from June of 2014, so a year ago, we've already picked up over 260,000 new jobs in the construction industry, and they are expecting that to grow very rapidly. In 2008, this number was a little over 7.4 million people. Residential building, 1.4 million people. Non-residential building, 721,000 people. Heavy civil, that's where the government money would show up. You know, we don't have a number for June, but go back to May, 474,000 people. So, but what's happening is, well, first of all, this industry is larger than the entire automobile and steel industries put together. We employ more people. And I think a thing that's really important is, when I was involved in building and development in Illinois, we worked with the Home Builders Association. They did a study that said that in a community, when $1 gets spent on residential construction, it actually gets spent 7 times in that community. So when I pay wages to a tradesman, and he pays his truck payment, and he pays for his rent, and he buys his groceries, and he pays, you know, and the guy who sold the groceries pays his labor, and that person pays his rent, it moves through the community immensely. So one of the biggest drivers of our economy, and one of the reasons we haven't had a real uptick in the economy since 2008, is residential housing has been dead. Housing starts has been one of the major economic indicators overall. Here's what we're looking at. It is a principal driver. I don't think it's the backbone. I think infrastructure has to be the backbone, and we tend to ignore our spine a lot. Okay? I mean, we have a lot. If we were to make a commitment to upgrading all of our infrastructure, I think it's somewhere in the $30 trillion number type of thing that we would have to spend today to bring everything up to an A level. But this is 1960. You can see how housing starts to move around. You see that ski jump down there? That's 2008. That's when we were at a point where we were building 2.2 million housing starts a year. That's because we made it available for anybody could borrow money. People could borrow more money than the house was going to cost. And that's what caused that huge bubble in real estate. And look where it dropped. It went from 2.2 million down to 400,000. And it settled down there for a long period of time. So you look at the number of people who were in the trades that got washed out. People who were in the construction businesses that got washed out. People who were unable to find new jobs because this doesn't translate to, well, okay, well, I'll go and just switch over to a different product line. If I'm a manufacturer, I could stop making electronic controls for this and make controls for that. But if I build houses and nobody's buying houses, I'm going to find some other way to do it. We just got back to 1 million units in 2014. Okay, so that's the first uptick we've really had. Now, if you run a trend line through there, we've been at about 1.5 million starts average from 1960 to 2008. That's really where the trend line is. That's where, if you think about water bottles at your local Albertsons store. If they know how many people live in the area and how many people shop at the stores, they probably have statistics that say it takes this many bottles of water for every person who shops, and that's the kind of supply that they have. So they've always got bottles of water at the store. In the construction industry, we've got the same thing. We have, if we're set for building 1.5 million houses, we have so many lumber yards, we have so many lumber mills, we have so many drywall plants, so many pipe producing plants, so much insulation. in 2008, we were going crazy because the mattress industry was sucking up all of the materials that we needed for the insulation industry. Because we had built all these houses, and every house needs a supply of mattresses. And so so we were running into this issue where we just could not meet the demand of the industry because we didn't have the infrastructure. And if people went and built new fiberglass plants, this chart tells me I'm going to go broke, because if I start to produce for the peak, then I'm going to be underproducing the rest of the time. So, and now you can really see, because anybody who invested in a new plant in 2008, sucked dust for a long time because nobody needed new materials. A little bit more compressed. This is 2000 to March of 2015. But it still shows the variety of things. But look at the thousands of units. We're down here in the thousands of units, and this is on a monthly basis, where the other chart is on an annual rate basis. This is another one. Now, remember how I talked about population? Population drives this number. How many million U.S. citizens are there? And divide the housing starts into the number of citizens, and it gives you a factor that you can work at. We sat at about 7 to 7.5 thousand starts per million people. 2010, we did a census. That census was 308 million people in the United States. Today, we're 7 million more. So 7 million more people means we should have built 49,000 new, we should have been at the rate of about 49,000 starts over that period of time, and we haven't even done a third of that. 2 years ago in San Diego County, bringing it to a closer place, we increased our population by jobs of over 30,000 people. Last year we did 30,000 people again. That kind of drives to 15,000 housing units per year. We did 2,500 in the last 2 years. We're just now starting to get up to 7,000 units, and that's predominantly in rental apartments because that's all anybody's building. So we're lagging very much behind the new demand that's happening, and that's going to cause more and more people to double up in places, more adult children moving back into mom and dad's house because there's not a place they can buy or rent. And so it's going to build up demand for the future. And so what I'm looking at is over the course of your next 10 years, you're going to see quite a strong demand for housing because the population's going to be there, the jobs are going to be there, and the people are going to be there. So it's going to drive that interesting thing. So there are also about 88,000 construction companies in the United States. 1.6 million individuals own construction companies. I mean, there's a lot of people who are invested in this industry. In 2008, we put $1 trillion worth of construction in place in the United States. Who knows what $1 trillion is? Has anybody got $1 trillion? No, it's 1,000 billion. No, 1,000 billion. Yeah, which is 1,000 million. So here's a little graphic. So if I gave you a half-inch stack of $100 bills, which we can all kind of relate to, that's 10 grand. I'd like to have that kind of thing. But if I wanted to give you $1 million, I'd have you give you a stack like that little one that he's standing by there. So that's $1 million in those little half-inch stacks. 100 million is a pallet of those, and $1 billion is 10 pallets of those. And $1 trillion is, notice the difference? So when we see these government numbers where they're talking about $18 trillion in debt, or our projects that we have to build next year are going to need to spend $1 trillion, that's what we're talking about. I mean, it is hard to fathom that number because all it is in paper is 3 more zeros. But what it does is pretty amazing.
Can you just lend me 1 pallet, please?
Oh, you'd be fine with 100 million? Well, let's see. If we did that, we'd be able to have, let's see, because there's 10,000 pallets here. So each one of us could have quite a few, you know. So this is really an interesting graphic when you're talking to people about the amount of money that we do. We put this kind of money into construction in the United States every year.
Every year?
Every year. Okay? You want a piece of it? So, construction industry makes up about 9% of the gross national product. Who can define what a gross national product is? An economic statistic that includes the gross domestic product, but it includes any income earned by residents from overseas investments minus income earned within the domestic economy by overseas residents. So people who are expatriates, their money they earn overseas counts here, and people who are expatriates here, their money that they earn counts in their home country. So the gross national product is, don't worry about the formula, don't write it down. But it basically is all private consumption and consumer spending, all government spending, all of the infrastructure or capital spending that the government does, and added to that is our net exports. So when people are talking about a trade deficit, it's deducting from our net gross domestic product. So if we have a $50 million trade deficit in a month with China, that means that our gross domestic product would have been $50 million higher had we not had that negative one.
It's a great point you make about China. Isn't that what they were doing for a long time? They were investing in their infrastructure because that counted towards their GDP, and that's how they were raising their GDP.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, investing in your infrastructure causes your GDP to grow.
Right.
Okay, and it's going to be interesting to watch what happens these next couple of weeks with China's meltdown in their market because they're having a little bit of their own bubble issue right now.
Because they were building these ghost towns overnight that nobody really lives in, but then the back half of that was because they were raising their GDP. That's what they were doing.
Correct, but if you have 3 billion people and you have a 10% growth, you have 300 million more people. You have another population the size of the United States that shows up in a period of time. So building ahead and having housing for people, to me, made a lot of sense. And plus, their growth was happening at such a rate that they had to invest in something. You know, it's so much easier when you're a dictatorship. Yeah, so much easier. You don't have to put up with all those votes and stuff. But truthfully, in a planned economy like China has, they're looking at, you know, I didn't run into this issue till I went and had my office over in England. And when I had a consultant with me one time, we were doing some analysis on the thing, and he says, George, you're missing one big thing. I said, what's that? He said, you know, when you go to the hotel and you grab that door handle and pull it open when the doorman's standing there, you're telling him he's not doing a good job. And I said, but I always open the door for myself. I don't need somebody to open. He says, you don't understand that in the United States, the economy and the whole culture is built on I. It's what do you want? Everywhere else in the world, it's built on the common good. What's the best for everyone? So if there's a guy who has a job opening the door, I should let him do his job and thank him for doing his job as opposed to taking it in my own hands and doing that type of thing. So this whole issue of the common good kind of drives planning in other places a lot different than ours. Our strategic planning is a lot towards how do I increase my own capital benefits? How do I increase my assets? How do I do that? And there's a lot of eyes in that as opposed to how do we invest in the best for the future? We see that just in high-speed rail issues. The rest of the world has functioning high-speed rails. We have functioning, non-functioning, boondoggles to build things that don't have the demand and truly don't meet any social need other than there's a place we can do it and we can repeat what somebody else has done. So our design to put in 1970s style high-speed rail in 2030, we should be thinking about something much different. Okay, so yes, China's plan was to take their excess GDP and invest it in the country, which grows their GDP. It was when they started to pull back on their investment in infrastructure that their GDP growth dropped from that 11, 12% down to 7%. Well, we've been muddling along at about 1.2, 1.3%, which is really not good because our population continues to grow. So we need to have more productivity. So how many of you have ever seen this chart? This is the US debt clock. And so this one shows $14.8 trillion. And this was from 3 summers ago when I taught this class the first time. 15.2, 16.8, 18.1, that's from this spring. Just keep an eye on the numbers. So that's live. Live. Yep. I can't even count that fast. And you can see how that money is going up. But just from 13 weeks ago, went from 18.1 to 18.28. We'll be at 18.3 before this quarter is over. I saw a thing that was really interesting. They did this whole thing with this, and then they took off they dropped the last 6 zeros off and made it look like a family at home. They said, okay, so we got $18 million in debt. Or no, yeah, it would be $18 million in debt for a family. We would only have about $27,000 in income and $35,000 in expenditures on an annual basis. So it really shows how the system is so set up so that it's just not. Economists fight all of the time about what it all means. What's happened with Greece? I mean, we've seen them, they've had to go through austerity, but they still seem to be buying food and doing all sorts of things. And now they're in trouble. So just so happens we can look at world debt clocks here too. So Greece, their public debt is 172% of GDP. So that means if their country produced $100 million worth of GDP a year, their debt is almost 2 times that. It's actually 1.72 times that. That's their public debt. Their external debt, that's money that they owe to people outside of the country. So like Germany and France, who are two of their biggest creditors, 217% of GDP. So it would take, if they said all we're going to do is pay down our debt, they would have to take the next 2.2 years worth of total GDP just to pay that debt off. So their economy is strangulated. Look at this one. This is the one that blows me away. We don't hear news about the UK being in terrible shape, but their external debt is 316% of GDP. We're only 98%. Okay? Saudi Arabia, it's only 20%. Okay? So these are numbers that have relative meanings in certain places. We've seen, just in my charts, you saw our national debt go up by $4.2 trillion. You know what that $4.2 trillion is? It's sitting on the balance sheet of the Fed now because we printed $4.2 trillion worth of new money, okay, to buy up our deficit. So, I mean, if you go to a bank and say, I can't pay my bills anymore, they might say, hey, well, we'll discount your bills if you agree to get this paid now. So why doesn't the Fed take its $4.2 trillion of new money that it did and the $4.2 trillion worth of debt that it did, fold those together and say, okay, that's forgiven and we're back at the $14 trillion. I think that's a feasible solution long term. But what we've done is we brought 4.2 trillion of that debt back into the country that was overseas. So I think we've done some, it's not an economics class. We'll get into that when you get into that. But
Professor, according to these numbers, what do you consider the best country in this economic situation compared with the others? Because I'm seeing different numbers. I'm confused there.
there's a group of countries called the PIGS. Portugal, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. Those are the 4 countries that we have been worried about economically for the last almost 5 years. And so Portugal, 234%, Ireland, 817%, Greece, 217%, and España at 160. Those are the 4 economies that that have not only high debt to GDP ratios, but almost no growth in their GDP and extremely high unemployment. In Spain, unemployment is worse than, I think, pushing 30% right now, which is like Mogadishu.
And on the other hand, China is the best in this list, right?
China has the lowest external debt. So if they might have borrowing within their country, so companies might have invested in bonds to be able to get a thing, but it's within their country. Those are things they control. The 6% is external. So they've got minimal external, and almost all of their external debt is in financing sales from, I put the link in the deck too so you can get at it, okay? But so I'm going to go back to this one. So you can look at states if you want and see what states have debt. You can look at the world clock, they're in there. Then they have all sorts of other things down here at the bottom that you can look at. Home sale, energy output, gold, etc. But this is a dashboard collecting, and if you roll over something, it tells you where it gets the information from. So you can literally look at the source for each of the numbers that are being calculated. So it's just an intriguing set of numbers. And there's our break. So let's take so a little bit of an economics lesson, but in the Chicago area. And it was really interesting because they followed their thousands of years old traditions of they would have a sacrifice before they started the building, and at the end of the building they would roast a lamb and have another time when they actually celebrated the topping out of the building. And it was interesting because it was very unique to Chicago that this type of trade experience would be brought in.
You flying Greeks over, or they just?
There's a Greek community in Chicago, and so a lot of them would then bring in friends or relatives who would then get work permits and work visas to do it. And so, but they also brought their influences with them. So Roman influences, the early forms of concrete using glass, the Roman arch, roads, aqueducts, infrastructure. The Catholic Church was big in the building of commissioned cathedrals throughout Europe. The Ottoman Empire was big in the other mosques and things that were built throughout the entire Mediterranean region. Indians contributed to intricate citywide plumbing systems and wade removals. Persians, the modern brick building. There are countless other nationalities that have lent their particular designs to the industry. We look at the skyscraper industry. I mean, somebody said they were working in Dubai or had lived in Dubai. So you've seen some of these amazing structures that have been built that we only get to see in Mission Impossible movies. So, but it's been amazing to see how these things have been built. You know, an industry that in the 1920s was just coming into being. Prior to that, we were limited to 5-story buildings before the end of the 1890s, when Otis came up with his brake that allowed elevators to safely be moved through a building. So elevators, the change from masonry to skeletal buildings with cast iron, then the entire influence of the steel industry, and now we're building buildings that are, well, the one that Calavatari proposed for Chicago was 2,000 feet tall. The industry sectors that we deal with, I pointed them out when we had the BLS information up there, but the residential, relatively simple, low tech, usually small business owners, customized builders, or the big companies like D.R. Horton and Toll Brothers and things who do high production building. But it's still one of the backbones of our industry. Commercial, it's about 1/3 of the market. These are longer duration projects and more complex systems. One of the ones that we're going to go visit is the Kaiser Permanente hospital that is being built up in Claremont Mesa. They have about 700 tradesmen working on that site every day. So you think about the complexity of what's going on there and the need to control that project. Heavy civil, this is pretty much the horizontal construction. Roadways, railroads, water, sewer systems, civil infrastructure, water treatment plants, sewer treatment plants. We took a class 2 years ago out to the San Vicente Dam, where they were raising the top of the dam 175 feet. And so it was an opportunity to see really one of the biggest heavy civil projects we had in our area. Now, the only problem is that it hasn't rained since then, so we have a dam that's now 175 feet taller, but no more water. Industrial plants. These are the ones where we manufacture things. You go around the airport out by Montgomery Field, there's lots of small manufacturing and industrial type plants. But you also get into the larger industrial plants like chemical, refineries, all of those type of things fall into the industrial category. And the other thing that becomes more involved with what is happening today is this whole issue of environmental construction. How do we take Carlsbad? We've got the new desalination plant that'll be coming online this fall, producing 50 million gallons a day of fresh water from seawater. How do we put sewage treatment plants where we've now got this issue of the sewage outfall that's 2 miles out in the ocean off of Point Loma that still pollutes the area. Now they're thinking about taking that water that they're pushing out in the ocean and turning it around and running it up to a plant that takes that and treats it and turns it into drinking water. There's a 500 billion gallon per day plant that does that up in Los Angeles already, that takes the wastewater, runs it through the 3 cycles of treatment, and then turns it back into, blends it with water that's going to be used then for drinking water. So all of those sectors are there, and all of those sectors are, most people end up choosing a sector, or a sector chooses them. It's rare that you go from heavy civil to vertical buildings. It's rare that you go from an industrial to a commercial. It's really more something intrigues you and that's what you go with. The players, the owners are driving forces. Nothing gets built unless somebody says, we need that project. So that owner can be public, that owner can be private, that owner can be in a not-for-profit. I don't know how many of you have seen the amount of hospital building that's happened in San Diego County over the last decade, but it's almost 100% done through not-for-profit organizations that have made the decisions to do this investment, other than the $1 billion hospital that got built up in Camp Pendleton. So we probably have rehabbed, replaced, and expanded our medical facilities better than most any place else in the country. So, but those are all because owners looked at the numbers and said, we're going to invest in that, and that's what got done. Design professionals, architects and engineers are a key part of the players in this, this industry. If we didn't have drawings and designs of things to build, we wouldn't have anything to build. And sadly, if we let the civil engineers do it all, everything would look like box. The design professionals are really crucial to our industry. The other ones who are in that design professional group are your landscape architects, interior design, interior architecture, furnishings, lighting, all of those things. And the other one is the construction professionals. Those are the people who run the businesses, that hire the trades, that actually implement the designs. We break the construction professionals down into a series of different groups. You've got your general contractor. In the old paradigm that I grew up in, the architect would design a set of drawings. We would put those out to bid. A general contractor would go out to all of his subcontractors and collect their bids, then put his bid together, make that presentation, and he might compete against 3 or 4 other general contractors, and the low bidder would then end up getting the job. So that general contractor really controlled all of the subcontractors behind it. The change came in the 70s. Sometimes owners said, well, no, we'd rather have a prime contract with the mechanical contractor or a prime contract with a concrete and steel contractor. And so we ended up with these multi-prime contracts that the owners really weren't prepared to be able to manage. And that's where construction managers came in to help them manage those multi-prime contracts. The specialty contractors are plumbing, mechanical, electrical, fire protection. So we pretty much call them the MPEs. They are typically anywhere from 40 to 60% of the cost of a project. And yet we treat them as if they were subcontractors. They really control a tremendous amount of the living part of the building, because those are the parts that will have to be operated and maintained and upgraded over history for the building to be able to continue to stay up to date. So special contractors are very important in it. And then we actually have the building trades, which are the skilled labor that actually does the physical work in the field. What is construction management? You're going to spend the rest of your life explaining this. It's not that it's hard to understand, it's just that people have their own understanding and their definition. You must first overcome their definition with your definition. Good example is there's a fellow by the name of Nick Tranner who's the VP of Southern California operations for Hensel Phelps Construction. Great guy. I work with him on the board for the ACE Mentor thing. His wife happens to be a PhD at UCSD. And so he says every once in a while he gets invited to some faculty thing that happens at school. And so his wife introduces him to some other academic, and the academic, oh, said, you're the construction guy. You know, this is a guy who's running probably a $300 million a year company, but as far as the industry is concerned, they think he's the carpenter, you know. And so that's one of the things that we still fight here, even in the school, is almost all of our work is on a thumb drive. We rarely have to do big graphics. We do presentations, but most of our work is, in theory, assembling and coordinating other people's work. And so so that's why I like the one that says, my job is to protect the owner's interest from the beginning to the end of the project. And that's how I do it through all these different methods, the little CM things that we do on a regular basis. But a CM can also be a person or a group of people or a firm. Our responsibilities: we receive written plans and specs, we change raw land, we coordinate materials, we coordinate labor efforts, coordinate equipment, guarantee sometimes a set price, set the schedule, strive for high quality without accidents or errors, regardless of the weather, interest rate fluctuations, or other unforeseen circumstances. Unlike when I'm manufacturing electronic parts, where I do it in a factory where I know exactly how many seconds it takes for people to put parts in and how things move along, we build one copy out in the field, in the weather, with whoever shows up that day. Okay? So it's really much more, I mean, we build only a single copy in most cases of what we build. It's not like we get to build a prototype and then build 15 of those. The project, we have several really important things that we need to monitor in the project. Cost is always crucial. Time is its couplet. It's the one that time and money. I remember when Dr. Linda Thomas Mobley was here, she was assigned to do all of the specialty stuff at the Olympic Village in Atlanta when the Olympic Games were there. And she was given almost an unlimited budget of money, but she couldn't have a day more time. Okay? She couldn't buy more time with whatever money she had. She had to be done when that opening ceremony started. Okay? So cost and time are usually on a teeter-totter. If you've got more time, you can do it with less cost. But if it's got to fit within a certain timetable, your costs have to cover all those things. We have to monitor quality. How many of you guys have cars? Who has the highest quality car? Well, I would go for a Bugatti Veyron. Okay. You know, $2.8 million, it's a reasonably good car. But you know what? It doesn't get me to the grocery store any quicker than a Vega does. You know, so one is extremely high custom quality, and the other is low production quality. But both, that's one of the things that you really need to understand as we go through this is we have to build to the quality that's specified.
Don't build the piano, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you don't build the Bugatti if you got a Vega budget, or you'll never get the project done. So understanding that quality is really dealing with the specifications and the owner's needs more than it is, I can't tell you what marketing people, we build the highest quality homes. Well, I would beg to differ with you. They build production homes that have decent quality, you know, but they are not the highest quality homes. So quality is a term that you'll go throughout your career where you need to make sure that your specifications that you're working with define what that quality is and how you're going to do it. Safety. This is, and you're going to go hear this over and over and over again as we go to sites, safety is king. Kristen Wonder, who teaches our safety course in the construction management program, is the regional director for Turner Construction for safety. And I asked her, so how much do they spend on safety? They said, we don't spend anything on safety. Safety is the essence of what we do. We get to decide every day when we go on the job site who gets to go home to their family. We can make sure that everybody does, or we can not care and have ambulances come from time to pick up people who are broken because we didn't make safety the number one thing on the project. So safety is something else. The other thing is understanding the scope. It's really crucial for an owner to know what they want. It's equally crucial for the designer or the CM to make sure that they help the owner know what that project is and what the limits of the scope. Because an example down in the British Virgin Islands where I used to live 6 months out of the year, they had a design build project for their new airport. They built new runways, they built everything. But, oh, and then they built a new bridge to get across the link between the two islands. But nobody included the approaches to the bridge in the contract. So they had a beautiful bridge, they had a beautiful airport, and you couldn't get across because nobody specified the scope. Well, the approaches, because they weren't integrally designed into the thing, cost almost the same amount as the bridge, about $4.2 million that they had to find because it wasn't within the scope of the project. So always have to understand what is the scope, what are we responsible to deliver? And then, of course, the function of the facility is important. Turner's philosophy is every person on the job site has that power. If the situation is not safe, if it doesn't conform to the safety rules that everybody agreed to in the safety plan, they can walk off the job. Because, you know, you think about the times when they're lifting a cage of steel. Well, if you happen to be standing below that cage of steel and you're not part of the team that's maneuvering it, if it falls, you're going to get it. Okay, so you have the right to move out from your work that you're doing if conditions are not safe. But you're right, does it all the way up to the project executive has to respond to because anybody who's a project executive that says, well, I'm going to override the safety person, and then somebody gets hurt, you can buy the whole company. So it's really important. This is something you're going to see 1,000 times in your career, the cost influence curve. That the ability to influence cost decreases as time goes, and the cost increases. Your ability to change it decreases as you go from the design to the physical construction. So this has always been the problem, is that if I don't get the design right, then I don't get the information in time to make changes to that design. And then if I have to make the changes once we're in the process of building, the costs are going to go sky high. Project delivery methods, these are just something we're going to touch on a little bit today, but they are the method by which we deliver our services. The most traditional one is the design, bid, build method, okay? That's where the owner hires a designer. The designer designs a project. They complete their design documents. They put it out for bid. The bidders bid those documents, and then the owner selects the most qualified, lowest bidder, and that project moves forward. Today, it's actually more like the design, bid, redesign, rebid, redesign again, rebid, build, litigate system, okay? So it really is not the best. Much of our government work is still dedicated to the design, bid, build system. What's changed is with construction management coming in and trying to help that process of controlling the design and maybe working with the potential bidders early on so that there is more of that influence of the cost in the construction or in the design phase, then they can improve that. The other thing that's come along, which is really a better object, if you have an owner who knows what they want, is the design build method. That's where the owner hires a consultant to put together a scope and program for their project. And then they go out and bid to various firms to both design and build that project. So design build is becoming a more popular way. But if you have a client who doesn't know exactly what they want, it's a dangerous, dangerous way to go. There is a hospital being built in Aurora, Colorado for the Veterans Administration that was supposed to be a $600 million project that is going to end up costing more than $1.4 billion because the owner keeps changing what they want and trying to force the builder to say, well, you should have included that. But it's not in the scope that we talked about. But you should have still included that. And so that's gone back and forth to the point where they literally are pulling it away from the Veterans Administration, who is mismanaging that project, and giving it to the Army Corps of Engineers to complete. So their methodology is so messed up. The other one that's out there, which is kind of a different type of this design build, is the BOT or the BOOT or the P3 type of projects. BOT is build, operate, transfer. So I want to build a new sewage treatment plant, but I want to make sure it's functioning before I get it. So I'm going to have you build it, operate it for 2 years, and then turn it over to me. So you'll not only build it, but you'll hire the staff that's going to operate it. You'll train them. You'll make sure that the facilities are working to the specifications we had. And once that happens, you're going to transfer it to me. The other one is the BOOT, which is the build, own, operate, transfer. And how many of you have gotten nailed by that Highway 125 toll road out in East County? You're driving down the highway and all of a sudden you find out you've caused an infraction because you've driven onto a toll road that is now collecting tolls from you and will charge you $40 plus the toll if you don't pay it. So that's a build, own, operate, transfer. Caltrans didn't have the money to build that road. The development going on out in Otay Lakes was on schedule to complete by year 2012. So they went out to private contractors who they gave them the right of way, but they had to build the road, own the road, operate it for a period of years, and ultimately transfer it back to Caltrans. Well, that group went bankrupt in 2012 because the housing didn't continue to grow, the traffic counts aren't there. So now the tolls are there, they're higher than they were before, it's on the ownership of Caltrans, but that's a boot type project. Yep, those of us who were raised and lived in Illinois and have lived with tollways for 65 years that had 20-year bonds, no, they're never going to go away. The only one I've ever seen go away is the Coronado Bridge toll. And that's because they were so far off on their numbers of how many cars were going to travel across. They paid the bonds off in 12 years as opposed to 30. Then they collected another $30 million. And then they finally said, hey, we better stop doing this. So those are the last one we're going to talk about is the integrated project delivery. And I consider integrated project delivery to be vaporware still. We all talk about it, but it's basically the owner, the architect, the contractor, the trades, the specialty contractors form a single purpose entity to build a project. And they all take the risk evenly and they all share the reward evenly. We've still had a very difficult time doing that. Although I look at my career, in my career, we were IPD because we were the owners, the architects, the contractors. We managed the property afterwards and we occupied buildings with tenants and things. So we did take all the risk. If we screwed up, we didn't have anybody else to go to other than ourselves to take care of that problem. And if we made money, we shared the rewards. So I have a few more slides, but we're going to save some of those for a little bit later. And I'm going to give you a little assignment here at the end. At the end of, there's a construction aptitude test on page 64 to 66. Take that construction aptitude test. You can do it orally, you can do it, make notes yourself. I'm not looking for you to turn that in. But then there's a chapter 2 test that's under the assessment tabs in Blackboard. So going to Blackboard, we click on the assessments, chapter 2 questions is there. It's only going to be there till midnight on Monday, so don't try to do it Tuesday morning, okay? So it'll be there till Monday night, and so when you've gone through chapters 1, 2, and 3, just go through the questions in here. They're fairly simple to answer. Some are multiple choice, some are true and false. But once again, it's kind of a test. I want to make sure everybody's into this system. And I will see you guys next Tuesday, right? Good.